there you go. Who am I and why? Well, this question can be looked at from two different aspects. One is a philosophical aspect, right? Philosophical aspect, which means, well, am I a man or a woman? And well, is that all I am? Am I a son or a daughter to somebody? Or a daughter to somebody? And is that all that I am? And why? If I am a son to somebody, why am I son to him? Why not to somebody else? Or let us look at another one. What else am I? Am I an engineer? Is that all I am? Or am I a student? Am I a child? Is that all I am? So, well, this is a philosophic question, but here in this particular session we are not going to discuss the philosophical aspect of who am I. Rather, we'll look into the biological aspect of it. Who am I? Now, let us ponder who you are. Think about it for a moment. Are you an eukaryote, or are you a prokaryote? What about your cell? Does your cell possess a cell wall? Well, yes. If yes, then probably you're a fungi or a bacteria or a plant. Well, if not, well, you are something else. And what about your cellularity? Are you a multicellular organism? Are you a multicellular being? How does your basically species reproduce? Does it reproduce sexually or asexually? Right. So if we answer all of these questions, what do we end out finding? Well, we find out that we are animals. And why are we animals? Because, well, we are eukaryotes. Certainly we are. Our mode of nutrition is heterotrophic. We are multicellular. And, well, we reproduce sexually, and our cells do not have any cell wall. Great. Figured out. We just figured out that we are animals. Now, animals are basically, they differ from each other in complexity. Some are extremely simple animals, which means that they are made up of a couple of cells. They don't even have tissues. Whereas there are other animals which are more complex, which are made up of tissues. Some of them are made up of organs. Some of them are even much more complex, which possess organ systems. Now, we are examples of animals that possess organ systems. We have organ systems. Now, what do we mean by an organ system? An organ system is a collection of different organs which work together to achieve a particular function. Let's look at a couple of these organ systems. Now, human beings, we have a circulatory system, we have a nervous system, respiratory system, digestive, a muscular system, skeletal system, reproductive system, and immune system, and so on and so forth. So we have a wide variety of these systems. Now, what does the circulatory system function towards? What does it do? What is the major goal of all the different organs that make up the circulatory system? The goal of all of these organs is to keep the blood moving inside the body, is to basically transport variety of materials in and out of the body, right? Similarly, what is the function of the digestive system? The digestive system has the function of breaking down the food and allowing the nutrients from it to be absorbed by the body. Similarly, the muscular system, the variety of muscles, the different type of organs have the function of bringing about movement, right? So in this particular session, we are going to study the nervous system. Let's proceed further. Now, the nervous system control and coordination. Now, the nervous system is a very important system and has evolved greatly in the higher animal forms like human beings. Now, let us look at the different aspects of the nervous system. We'll try to understand the meaning of the word control and coordination in just a little while. Now, most of the multicellular animals have a nervous system, but there are some animals that just don't have a nervous system. Forget about a nervous system, they don't even have neurons, the cells that make up the nervous system. For example, sponges, poriferans. Now, sponges, they don't have any nervous system. Well, as life becomes, as the complexity in animals increase, you will find very advanced nervous systems. Jellyfish, for example, has a very primitive nervous system, very simple nervous system, just a couple of hundred neurons connected to each other controlling the muscles. That is it. But let us look at the functions of the nervous system, the second aspect. Well, the nervous system controls and coordinates muscular movements. Now, the first function of the nervous system is to control muscular movements. Control. You can, right now, you can lift your leg if you wish to. You can, draw your finger into your nostrils, or, you can do a wide variety of controlled muscular movements. Right, I hope that's clear. Another function of the nervous system is to coordinate muscular movements. When I use the word coordinate, I mean to say coordination. The word coordinate means a harmonious functioning, or a harmonious relationship between two different parts, two different muscles. Right, now let us look at an example of a coordinated movement. And here in this image you can see a juggler. What is this person doing? He's juggling balls. He's got like 3 or 4 balls, and he's throwing them up in the air, catching them, and repeating the cycle over and over. Now, what does this particular phenomenal act requires? It requires this individual to use his eyes and use his hands together in a harmonious manner. Right? So the eyes, the muscles present in the eyes are tracking the position of the different balls. That is the function of the muscles in the eyes. And those muscles in the eyes are coordinated, are basically in harmony with the muscles of the arms, which are catching the ball. Right? So there is this amazing hand-eye coordination that we are observing. We basically observe in jugglers. You can see a hand-eye coordination while you're playing football or any other particular game. Right? So this is the second important function of the nervous system, controlling the muscular movements and coordinating different muscular movements, basically involving many muscles together when they are involved in performing a particular function. It's called coordination. Another important function of the nervous system is cognition. Now, the word cognition means to think, problem solving. Let us look at what cognition means in details. Perceiving. How do you look at a particular aspect? For example, when I look at a certain individual, I perceive the person as a good person. Somebody else will perceive him as a bad person. Another person will perceive that particular person as a neutral person. Right? So that is perception. Then the ability to reason. Why is 2 plus 3 5 and not 4? The ability to reason. Learning. What you're doing right now, you're taking inside this huge amount of content that is being dealt with. Evaluating, should I do this, should I not do this? Remembering, I remember that you did this for me, and I'm going to do vice versa for you when the time comes. Right? All of this is cognition. And what basically achieves cognition is the nervous system. It is the function of the nervous system to provide this ability of cognition to an individual. However, all animals do not possess the ability of cognition. I don't believe, so far from the research, I don't believe that earthworms are able to remember what the farmer was like who displaced that particular earthworm from the cow dung and throw it into the field. Right? So remembrance, well, I'm not too sure. Anyways, so I hope you've understood the function of the nervous system. Now, the next aspect that we are going to study about the nervous system are the parts of the nervous system. Now, the nervous system can be divided into 2 major parts, and the first part is called the central nervous system, and the second is called the peripheral nervous system. Now, what are the bases of us dividing the nervous system into 2 parts? Is their position. Now, the central nervous system is made up of the brain, comprises of the brain and the spinal cord. The brain is present inside our skull, also called the cranium, and the spinal cord is attached to the brain and runs through a bony structure called the vertebral column in case of vertebrates. In other animals which do not have a vertebral column, the spinal cord may still be present. So, the central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord, and yes, there are certain neurons. Now, this is very important. The central nervous system is made up of a special kind of a neuron called the interneuron or the relay neuron. Let us look at the next aspect, which is what is the peripheral nervous system. Now, the peripheral nervous system is made up of nerves. And what kind of nerves? The nerves that come out, that are basically attached to the skull, that come out, that emanate out of the brain, or that emanate out of the spinal cord. Now, this is what the peripheral nervous system comprises of: the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. And also these major nerves that are coming out of the spinal cord eventually move into the body and become finer and reach the different parts of your body. For example, the tips of your finger, the ear lobes, etc., right? So those nerves, these types of nerves, make up the peripheral nervous system. The next aspect that we need to understand, that we need to learn about the nervous system, is the neuron. Now, what is a neuron? A neuron is the cell that makes up the nervous system. These cells, they make up the nervous system. Now, the neuron is also known by another name, which is the nerve fiber. Now remember, neuron and nerve fiber are the same thing. These are the synonyms. However, a nerve is not a neuron or not a nerve fiber. A nerve is very different from a nerve fiber. Nerve is a collection of neurons, large number of neurons packed together like a cable is called a nerve, right? So a nerve is different from a nerve fiber, but a neuron and a nerve fiber are one and the same thing. Now a nerve, these neurons, they make up the nervous system. So your brain and the spinal cord and all the nerves are made up of neurons. Well, what is the function of the neuron? The function, there are basically two important functions of the neurons. I've written only one. The first function of the neuron is to collect signals. And what kind of signals? Changes in the environment. So the neurons are responsible for detecting changes in the environment. Not all type of changes in the environment. For example, there is a constant change in the magnetic field of the earth. Can you feel it? Can you detect it? No, because the change in the magnetic field has no relevance to the existence of the humans. I mean, directly. Right? So we don't have any neuron that can detect that particular change. However, our body, the surface of our body, is rich in neurons that can detect changes in temperature, and for good reasons. If it is too cold, there are neurons called thermoreceptors which can detect changes in temperature. If there is a change in pressure, for example, somebody is putting a certain weight on top of your head, you can detect the change. If the pressure is too much and you are unable to detect it, you won't be able to escape this particular disastrous change. So the first function of the neuron is to basically collect signals, is to receive signals or identify changes in the surrounding. And the second function of the neuron is, not only does a neuron collect signals, it receives these changes, but also what a neuron does is it also transmits, it also conducts this particular signal that it has received, this change in the environment that it has received, to the central nervous system. So that is the function of the neuron. We'll see it soon. So the second function of the neuron is to conduct the signal. Whatever change is taking place and is relevant, is important for us, is received by the neuron and is transmitted to the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, for processing. So that is the function of the neuron. Also, we'll look into this signal transmission in a little while. Now let us try to understand the structure of the neuron. The neuron can, for the sake of simplicity, the neuron can be studied in three different parts. And the three different parts are the cell body, which is also called the soma. So the neuron can be divided into three parts for the sake of simplicity: soma, or the cell body; the dendrites, second part; and third is the axon. Let us look into the details of all of these three parts that make up the neuron. Now, soma, or the cell body, is the central part of the neuron, which basically contains the nucleus. It will contain the other organelles like the mitochondria, the endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi body, etc. The cytoplasm, which in this particular case we call the neuroplasm. So this is the cell body. This is the site where a large number of major metabolic reactions are taking place. Right. Now the soma, or the cell body, grows outwards. You can see these outgrowths or projections, and there are so many of them. Each of this particular projection then branches into thinner segments, and these particular outgrowths from the soma or the cell body, which are long but not too long and are numerous, are large in number, there are many of them, these are called dendrites. And what is the function, what function does the dendrite perform? Let us have a look at this. Now, dendrite is the site of the neuron from where a signal enters. Now, whatever signal, whatever message is going to enter the neuron, it cannot enter here, or the cell body here. Signals cannot enter here. Signals can only enter at the tips of the dendrites. So, dendrites are the receiving centers of the neuron, signal receiving centers of the neuron. Yeah, signal receiving points of the neuron, you can say. Now, once the signals have been received, the signals are sent outwards. Basically, first of all, the signal will travel from the surface, and then the signal will have to move to some place, right? So now each neuron has multiple number of dendrites, but there is only one axon, and this long fiber here is called the axon. Now, axon is surrounded by cells called the Schwann cells, right, or oligodendritic cells, but you don't have to write that, just remember Schwann cells. Now, the axon is surrounded by Schwann cells. Why, we will see in a little while. Now, under these Schwann cells is running a long single fiber called the axon, and the axon at the end again divides into multiple thin filaments, which basically end up in structures called axon terminals. Right, so there is this axon which divide into multiple filaments. Each filament then ends in an axon terminal, each of them. So there are a large number of axon terminals. Now, the axon, the point where the axon is connected to the cell body, this particular part here is called the axon hillock. And I hope you know the other parts, the cell membrane, etc., etc. Also, let us just talk about these particular gaps. Now, if you see a little closely, each of this Schwann cell, now there are these different Schwann cells which are covering the axon. There is a little space between the adjacent Schwann cell. So there is this node, right? So this particular junction where two Schwann cells meet each other is called a node of Ranvier. These are nodes, and each of this particular junction between the two Schwann cells is called the node of Ranvier. Now, the function is, it allows the movement of ion, which you will study in your higher classes. Anyways, let's also discuss about what is the function of the axon terminals. Now, the signal that moves into the neuron from the dendrite then moves across the cell membrane and moves inside. It moves inside the axon, inside the Schwann cells. Through the axon, the signal is moving, and eventually the signal is trying to move out through the axon terminals. Now, at the end of the axon terminals, there are two types of cells. The kind of cell that is found at the end of the axon terminal can either be another neuron or can be an effector cell. By effector cell, I mean a muscle fiber. Muscle fiber is nothing but a muscle cell. Just like a nerve fiber is a neuron or a nerve cell, similarly a muscle fiber is a muscle cell. So the axon terminals are connected either to a neuron or they are connected to another effector cell, which is a muscle fiber. Now we'll see how it works in a little while. Now, so far I hope the structure of the neuron is clear to all of you. Let's move to the next slide. Now let us have a look at the function and the structure of the Schwann cells, how they are arranged around the axon in a little greater detail. Now, the Schwann cell is a thin but a pretty oblong cell. If you flatten it out, it probably will appear a little like a chapati. So this is the Schwann cell. It's pretty long, and a Schwann cell, so you can see the axon here. Let's use the pointer. So you can see the axon here, and around the axon we have a Schwann cell that has just started to form. It is forming. And once it forms, what it does, it starts to grow like this as a loop. Can you see here? So the Schwann cell eventually encloses the axon and surrounds it. It coils around the axon. And why does it do so? Inside, on the surface of the axon, there is this electric signal that is flowing. So here we have electric signals, the positive and the negative charges that are moving on the surface of the axon. Now, if there are no Schwann cells, there will be a leakage of these electric currents into the surrounding. So the Schwann cells basically act as an insulating layer. They act as insulators, and they prevent the leakage of the important electric signals out of the axon. That is the function of the Schwann cells. All these Schwann cells together are called a myelin sheath, M-Y-E-L-I-N. They are called the myelin sheath, and the function of the myelin sheath is to insulate, is to provide electric insulation. Let us look at the last aspect of the neuron, and that is the types of neurons. So there are 3 different types of neurons, and even though there are many other types based on many other characteristics, but on the basis of the function a neuron performs, there are 3 types of neurons. The first is called a sensory neuron, the second is called a motor neuron, and the third is called the interneuron. Now recall the interneuron. Let's go back into the slides and look at the interneuron. See, interneurons are a part of the central nervous system. So interneurons are found only in the brain and only in the spinal cord. Only in the spinal cord. Now this is what we must bear in mind at all the times. Interneurons here. This relay neuron or interneuron is one and the same thing. They are a part of the central nervous system. Now let us start with the sensory neuron. Now the sensory neuron are of different types. For example, we've got gustatory receptors. Sensory neurons are also called receptor cells. See, sensory neuron, receptor cell. They are also called afferent neurons. Let's write it down. Afferent, A-F-F-E-R-E-N-T. So sensory neuron or a receptor neuron or an afferent neuron are one and the same things. Now the sensory neuron is one of its ends is connected to the surface of a particular organ. For example, these receptor neurons are found in the eyes, where we call them the photoreceptors. And what is their function? Their function is to receive light and convert it into an electric signal. So they are basically converting light into electric signals. So if you perceive the color red, they are going to convert that red color into a certain kind of an electric signal. If you perceive bright light, they are going to convert that bright light into a certain kind of an electric signal. So the receptor cells are of different types. They can be photoreceptors present in the eyes, olfactory receptors that perceive the smell, that basically receive the smell, convert them into the electric signal found in the roof of the nostrils. They can be gustatory receptors found in the tongue. They can be baroreceptors or pressure receptors. Similarly, you can have thermoreceptors. Any idea about what a thermoreceptor is? Correct. If you've guessed it right, thermoreceptor will detect changes in the temperature in the surrounding. Right. So there are a variety of sensory neurons, also called afferent neurons, also called receptor cells. Now what happens here? Let us look what happens in the sensory neuron. Now the receptor cell, let's take an example of let's say this is a receptor, this is a baroreceptor. Let's say this is a baroreceptor, pressure receiving receptor cell here. Now and this is present in your arm, let's say your bicep, your hind arm. Now somebody pricks a pin. Now that pin prick is basically extremely high pressure. The tip of the needle will generate very high pressure. Now that pressure change is received by the tips of this particular baroreceptor cell. And what this cell will do, this will convert that pressure into a certain kind of an electric signal. Now remember, different kinds of pressure are converted into different types of electric signals. So this pinprick is converted into an electric signal, and then electric signal moves inwards. Now remember that a signal always is received by dendrites. So the ending of these receptors are nothing but these are dendrites. So the dendritic ends are present in the skin or probably in the eyes or the nose. So the signal is received, and then this particular pressure change is converted into an electric signal, and that specific electric signal is then relayed, is transmitted towards where? Towards the central nervous system. You can see this is the spinal cord, and spinal cord is a part of the nervous system. Now have a look here. You can see here, this is the cell body or the soma, here, and this is the dendritic end. These are the dendritic ends. Now from the dendrite, the cell body is connected like this, and what is on the other side? There lies an axon, and now these electrical signals are sent via the axon into the central nervous system, the spinal cord. Now the spinal cord can also take a decision. The spinal cord, there are certain decisions that the spinal cord can take. All the emergency decisions, for example, moving yourself away from a fire or a cracker, these decisions are taken up by the spinal cord. There are other decisions, for example, what is the under root of 8? Those kind of decisions are taken up by the brain. So the signal can be processed here in the spinal cord, or this electric signal can be sent to the brain. This signal can also be sent to the brain. It certainly will be, but certain decisions can be taken up by the spinal cord. Now, once the signal has been processed, what has to be done with this particular signal? The decision is taken by the central nervous system, and then a signal is relayed, is sent out. So the signal is sent out, and it is sent out to the motor neuron, and here you see the cell body. So there are very tiny dendrites here on this end. Let me just rub this marker off, and I hope you can see so there are these tiny dendrites. So these dendrites are receiving the signal, and then that particular signal, and what is that signal saying? It is sending a message, some kind of a message. Now that electric signal now moves through the axon. See how long the axon of the motor neuron is. It is an extremely long axon. Now this axon moves out of the spinal cord and carries the signal to the effector organ, an organ which will bring out a change, and this effector organ is a muscle. And where is this muscle? This muscle is again in your arm. And where were these sensory neurons? They were in your arm. And what stimulus did you get? You got a pin prick. You were pricked by a pin, right? So you felt a pin prick, the signal was sent inside, the processing was done, an appropriate response is generated. In what form? In an electric signal. Electric signal moves outwards, reaches appropriate muscles. Now you see, these are those sensory nerve endings, the axon terminals, which are attached to the muscles. Now they are attached to a large number of muscles. Each of them is attached to a different muscle fiber or a muscle cell. And what will happen? The muscle fibers will contract, and your arm will be moved away from the site or away from the pin, so that no further harm can be done, right? So much for the functioning of the motor neuron, right? So we've done sensory neuron and the motor neuron. The motor neuron is also called the efferent neuron. It is also called the efferent neuron. Motor neuron, efferent neuron, one and the same thing. Now we are left out with one more neuron, which is called the relay neuron or the interneuron. Now in this diagram, you can see that this neuron, which connects the sensory neuron and the motor neuron, this particular neuron here is called the relay neuron. Now the function of the relay neuron is to connect these two neurons, right? So and here in this particular diagram, let us also have a look at what's written in the diagrams. So the sensory neuron, the function of the sensory neuron is to send the signal from the receptor to the central nervous system. Receptor to the central nervous system. The function of the relay neuron here. The function of the relay neuron is to send the signal from the central nervous system to the central nervous system. Why? Because it is present inside the central nervous system. It is picking a signal inside the central nervous system. Its signal ends in the central nervous system itself. So also what you can write here, the function of the relay neuron is to connect the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. You can also write it here. And what is the function? What does the motor neuron connect? The motor neuron here, it connects the central nervous system to the effector organ, which is usually a muscle, right? So I hope we have just accomplished all the aspects at your level, and you can observe the video over and over again if you find any difficulty. Thank you.